Choosing who to vote for in Canada is complicated. A lot of Canadians have the misconception that they vote directly for Canada's Prime Minister, just like how the Americans vote directly for their president. But actually, this isn't the case. Embarrassing story. I remember going to the polls for the first time when I was 18. I thought I would see the party leaders on the ballot: Harper, Layton, Dion, and May. Instead, I saw a bunch of random names I didn't recognize. What was going on? These random names were my local candidates. In Canada, we only vote for a local representative. That local representative usually belongs to a party. The leader of the party that gets the most local candidates elected becomes the Prime Minister. But this makes it very difficult for Canadians to choose who to vote for. Should you choose based on party platform, or the party leader, or your local candidate? There are other considerations too. Should you vote strategically? If you don't like any of the options, should you vote at all? Let's take a look. Hi, you're watching Gabby on Government. I'm Gabby and I'm an ordinary Canadian on a journey to learn about my government. Thanks for joining me in today's video where we'll be discussing how to choose who to vote for in a federal election. In Canada, we only vote directly for a local candidate. By doing so, we indirectly choose a party and the leader of that party who is trying to become Prime Minister. This means there are three main factors to consider when choosing who to vote for: the party platform, the party leader, and the local candidate. The first way you can decide to vote is based on what the party says they believe in, also known as the party's policy platform. Typically, each major party publishes a written platform that's about 100 pages long and about as exciting as my calculus textbook. This document outlines the party's stance on pretty much any issue you can think of, and their plans for what they would do if they were in power. Parties typically submit these plans to the Parliamentary Budget Office, who will tell them how much their plan will cost Canadians, allowing them to brag about how they're going to balance the budgets or only spend $1 million a year on their doggy daycare program. What are parties promising these days? Most Canadians won't even glance at a party platform, let alone the cost of their plans, so they rely on news, debates, and tools like Vote Compass to summarize party policies. You have to be very, very careful when you only use a party's platform to decide your vote. The news, debates, Vote Compass, and even the platforms themselves can really skew how good a certain idea or plan is. Sometimes policies are really complicated, and a policy that looks attractive on paper isn't actually good when it's implemented. Sometimes parties get in power and don't actually do what they say they were going to do. I know, shocking. Another problem is that sometimes the leader of the party doesn't believe in some of the elements of the party platform. This brings us to the second way you can decide who to vote for. The second way you can decide who to vote for is by judging the party leaders. For better or worse, the party is largely steered by the leader, and if the leader becomes the Prime Minister, a huge amount of power is concentrated in their office. How does one judge a party leader? Well, it can be really subjective and usually based on all sorts of personal factors, like the leader's career, how much they feel the leader can be trusted, and the leader's personal beliefs. One of the issues with choosing who to vote for based on the party leader is that the leader's values don't always line up with the official party policy. So it can be confusing which one will matter when it comes time for implementation. The other issue is that the party leader may be from, say, Ontario and doesn't necessarily care all that much about your problems in, say, Alberta. That is someone else's job, which brings us to the final way you can decide who to vote for. The third way you can decide who to vote for is by judging your local candidates. The local candidate is typically an individual chosen to represent a party in a specific riding. For example, in the Toronto-St. Paul's riding, Carolyn Bennett is running as a member of the Liberal Party, Stephanie Osadchuk is running as a member of the Conservative Party, Phil DeLuna is running for the Green Party, Sydney Coles is running for the NDP, and Peter Remedios is running for the People's Party. Even if you live in the Toronto-St. Paul's riding, it's likely that you haven't heard of these people. Local candidates typically do not have as much fame as the party leader, but they are very important because their job is to bring the issues of their region or neighborhood to Parliament if they're elected. Voting based on your local candidate can be great because you can normally meet the candidate and ask them questions. You may even have mutual friends and contacts, so it's simpler to know how much you can trust them. The downside of voting based on your local candidates is that most local MPs are backbenchers without a lot of power in Parliament. That said, they're still on committees and have the ear of their leader. There is no right or wrong answer of which factor should be most important when choosing a candidate, and it may change from election to election. For example, one election, there might be a really amazing party leader or local candidate you want to support. But the next election, you're swayed by a party's unique solution to a problem that's important to you. So there are obviously more than 3 factors when choosing who to vote for, and one consideration that's always on a keen voter's mind is strategic voting, also known as tactical voting. This is a way of voting that's often misunderstood. To begin to understand strategic voting, let's look at a classic Canadian example. Let's say you have left-wing values. You're part of a union, you follow Jugmeat on TikTok, you have a daily yoga practice, and you wear Bernie socks. But you live in a riding that always votes Conservative. For whatever reason, in the upcoming election, the Liberal candidate has a chance of winning. The polls say they're close. While you feel like your values are closer to the NDP, you hold your nose and vote Liberal so that they have a greater chance of kicking out the Conservatives, who you like even less. A lot of people critique strategic voting. Surely you should just vote your conscience. If you like NDP, vote NDP. I do sort of think strategic voting has its place, but unfortunately a lot of people think they're voting strategically when they actually are not. In order to vote strategically, you have to look at your individual riding, not Canada as a whole. So using our example, because in the national polls it looks like the Liberals and Conservatives are close, it may not matter at all whether you vote Liberal rather than NDP. You need to look at your specific riding. I think the best way to do this is to use the aggregate polling website 338canada.com. Let's take an example from the 2021 federal election coming up. Looking at Canada as a whole, it looks like a close race between the Liberals and Conservatives. But to get the whole picture, you need to look at your specific riding. For example, if my riding is Simcoe Grey, I would Google 338 Simcoe Grey and see that my riding is a safe Conservative riding. Based on polling, the Conservatives have over a 99% chance of winning. This is actually a really interesting opportunity for you as a voter. Since your riding is pretty much guaranteed to elect a Conservative MP, you can vote for whoever you want. If you want to vote MDP, you can do it and it won't really have an effect. But does this mean that in your riding every non-Conservative vote is wasted? Some may say yes, but I say it sends a message to the Liberal establishment. You prefer NDP policies. If enough people in your riding do this, it may result in the Liberals taking up NDP policies, or the momentum causing an even better result for the NDP in the next election. However, if I look at a different riding, say Sault Ste. Marie, I see that it's a dead heat between the Liberals and Conservatives. In this case, even though I like the NDP, I may want to vote Liberal so at least the Conservatives don't win. I think there are issues with this strategic voting mindset since it sends a confusing message to the party establishment. But this is a situation where I think it at least makes sense. Strategic voting causes issues for our democracy. It's generally accepted that having more than 2 major parties is healthy for a democracy. It pushes the established parties to consider the voices of smaller groups and gives more choice to voters. Strategic voting essentially ensures that only 2 parties will stay in power. Let's look at an example. Since 2008, there has been a well-known campaign called ABC, anything but conservative. This is a thinly veiled liberal campaign to encourage voters to choose the left-leaning party that has the best chance of beating the conservatives. In nearly every riding, this campaign takes away votes from the NDP and transfers them to the Liberals. If you're left-leaning, you may think this is a good thing since it ensures a Liberal leader. However, this may be short-sighted thinking. Campaigns like anything but conservative mean that if there's a riding where NDPs have a surge in popularity, it would not be known since voters are scared into voting Liberal. This has the dual effect of emboldening the Liberals to ignore popular NDP policies and producing voter apathy. People begin to feel like they don't really have a choice of who to vote for. The NDP aren't the only party that suffers from strategic voting. The Green Party, People's Party, and Bloc Québécois also lose votes in this way. I should note that this would not be the case if our voting system were changed from first past the post to a fairer system like ranked ballot voting or proportional representation. A story for another day. So far, we have talked about the three major factors to consider when choosing who to vote for and strategic voting. The last consideration I want to cover is what to do if you don't like any of the parties and are considering not voting or spoiling your ballot. If you're a disillusioned voter and think that all the leaders are stupid liars, I still encourage you not to spoil your vote, or worse, not vote. Instead, my suggestion is to research and maybe even meet your local candidates. As I mentioned in the intro, we only indirectly select a party and a prime minister. The way our system is supposed to work is that you only concern yourself with choosing the person you want to represent your geographic region. Almost always, these local candidates are much more down-to-earth, straightforward, and approachable than the leaders of their parties. They are often engaged citizens with little hope of winning, but are committed to the democratic process. Running as a candidate is extremely time-consuming and draining, but these people are willing to do it so you have a choice in the election. Choosing who to vote for based on your local candidate may just restore some of your faith in politics. Another option, if you don't like any of the parties, is to consider casting a protest vote. This means voting for a smaller party that leans in the same way as the established parties. For example, voting for the People's Party instead of the Conservative Party, or the Green Party instead of the Liberal Party. Even if you don't fully agree with the policies of the smaller party, it's better than a spoiled ballot because it at least registers if you are left or right leaning and that you're unhappy with the corresponding established party. It may also give the smaller party more resources by way of recognition and government refunds. If you are still not convinced by your local candidates and you don't want to cast a protest vote, I think it's acceptable to spoil your ballot under one condition, which I'll talk about at the very end of this video. You spoil your ballot by simply not marking your ballot correctly. This has the benefit of at least registering that you, and by extension your demographic, came out and took the time to vote. Unfortunately, spoiling your ballot does not convey any information to the parties. A ballot spoiled by mistake or spoiled by writing in your political views are all just marked as a generic ballot spoiled. This is why I think it's better to send some sort of message by way of protest vote. So when do I think it's okay to spoil your ballot? You want my opinion? Well, here it is. Voting in the federal election is really the bare minimum of fulfilling your duty as a Canadian. Everyday citizens need to get involved in our civic process so we can continue to live in a beautiful, peaceful country. Voting is the very last step in a long line of civic work that you can get involved in. I think you've earned the right to spoil your vote only if you've been part of the process to either choose your local candidate or your party's leader. There are so many ways to get involved in selecting our country's leadership before Election Day. One is to become a member of a party. This allows you to vote on your party's leader and even influence your party's policy platform. The second way to get involved is by joining a local riding association. If you're part of your local riding association, you'll have the ability to help find and select the person who will run to represent your party in your riding. If you get involved in either of these ways and your candidate isn't chosen, I believe you have earned the right to spoil your ballot in the federal election. You've already voted in a way that's arguably more impactful than only voting in the final election. Just my opinion. I think there are very, very few cases where it's acceptable not to vote at all, like if your car catches on fire on the way to the polling station. If the choices all seem so bad that you don't want to vote, take that as a sign that you need to get involved at some level. Not voting while also not being involved is sort of like if a friend invites you to help plan a potluck, you don't do anything and you don't bring a dish, and then you complain that all of the food tastes awful. You have to get involved if you want to critique. Is it a lot of work to choose who to vote for? Yes. But just like eating right to keep our bodies healthy, we all have a responsibility to make an informed choice on election day to keep our democracy healthy. So take an hour to figure out who your local candidates are, skim your party's policy platform, figure out what your favorite leader's career was, and consider joining a party or riding association. Then I'll see you at the polls. So, what do you think? What do you think is the most important factor in voting? Do you think people should vote strategically? Is there ever a situation where it's okay not to vote? How are you going to choose to vote in this upcoming election? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm not a civics expert, so if I got something wrong, or you want to add something, let me know in the comments. I think learning about civics is super important, so if you want to help other people find my content, I would be so grateful if you would like this video, share it, and subscribe. Thanks again, and see you next time.